I'm going to talk about Point Blank, V is for Victory from Lock and Load Publishing. This is a game designed by Sean Drulinger, and this copy was sent to me from Lock and Load Publishing, David Heath, and so I want to thank him and thank Lock and Load Publishing for giving me the opportunity to play this because it's kind of a pre-release. This game is coming out just now. I saw a video last night with the folks at Lock and Load, and they were announcing that I think the shipments have arrived. So if you've ordered this, you should be getting yours soon. I played this enough now to still need more plays and actually want to play this more. So that's a good sign. Spoiler alert about what my thoughts are going to be. But I like to play a game a few times before I give my initial thoughts. And these are my initial thoughts on the game, both kind of a review of the game, but also talking about the gameplay as well. And my initial thoughts will change over time with the more plays I have. I tend to grow more attached to a game the more I play it and understand it better and understand the strategy, tactics, and what it's trying to simulate better and mechanisms. I usually grow more fond of a game. However, there are times where I'll come across a game where I kind of enjoy it maybe the first time, and then the more I play it, I kind of lose some interest in it. I don't think this is going to be one of those games because this is a more of a kind of a system and almost a kit, so to speak, that has a lot of possibilities. I mean, it has a lot of scenarios in there, but it also has some do your own type scenarios, and has the ability to expand upon what it conveys. So I like that aspect. So let's get with the after action report. I played this a few of the scenarios, but I played this scenario a few times. This is the Bedlam Bridge. This is the first scenario, kind of almost a training scenario. It's very symmetrical. Both sides have relatively equal or matching forces to the extent that those forces can match. And the victory condition is right dead center of the map. It is the bridge itself and controlling that bridge. You have to control that bridge, and then the bridge needs to have two white flags and a black flag to get in there. So that leads to some interesting decisions, as we'll talk about here in the after action report. As I said, I've played this game. I've played it solo, I've played it opposed, and I've played it two-handed, where I'm playing both sides. I probably need to play the solo a little bit more to give a better assessment of it. When I've only played that I think one time, and it was a little clunky. But again, I mean, it's very similar to some of the other offerings out there whenever you're using decision charts and decision trees. Basically, you have kind of a chart you roll on to tell what the AI or the opponent's going to do, and then based on what its posture is, and each scenario has a posture, whether it's defensive posture or offensive posture, and that's going to give you a different decision tree for the different actions, whether it's a recon action, a move action, or an offensive or an attack action or fire action. So you have all these decision charts, and they're fine, and they work well. No cards in this is a card game, but they don't use the solo assist cards, which Lock and Load Tactical has solo assist and WWII 5 has solo assist, but they just have the charts for now. Are you going to have more cards to a card game? Who knows? But out of the ways I've played this, I really like it opposed. I think that was the intent of this, is to have a card game. I think this is inspired heavily from Upfront, which was a two-player card game back from Avalon Hill. And so this plays well as a card game. It's a game. I mean, you have this deck of action cards that you're going through and making decisions based on those action cards. Although you're not as limited as you might be like in Combat Commander, because you can always just discard a card and use whatever icon is on the unit, and it affects one unit in that regard. So it might not be as efficient, whereas if you do a move action, you can move a whole stack. So much more efficiency, but that's all part of the decision space that you have here. This is truly a card game. So in this after action report, The Allies prevailed, but barely. I mean, they had really a commanding command of the battlefield early on, and were took out the Panzer III, and took out several of the infantry squads, reduced them to half squads, and then took them out in short order. So very methodical. But the Germans held on. They held on to the last minute, and eventually took out the U.S. Tank. That each side has a tank in this. It's an M4A1. They took that out towards the very end of the game, and that's one of the key factors here. You have to have two whites and a black, and the two tanks are the black flags. However, each side has a RPG, or like a bazooka or a Panzerschreck for the Germans, and they have that has a black flag. So you have to kind of hold on to that. The U.S. They lost their tank, and they were able to get this guy to flank around and take out the German tank. The Germans had the bridge under control, but you have to have it till the end of end of this deck. It's 2 turns. Each turn is going through this whole deck here. You got to go through this deck of action cards. Each turn is a full deck, so you have to go through this deck twice to finish the game. And the Germans lost their tank on this. Actually, it's interesting. Both tanks lost it on the bridge. I don't know if I think I can do that from stacking rules. I need to read up on that. But both tanks lost it on the bridge, which is kind of interesting, and somewhat of a narrative. And again, this game lends itself to somewhat of a narrative approach as you're playing it, and how things play out with the different squads and the decisions. But these guys were able to get around to the side, do a flank attack, and then take out that after several shots. And that took out the Germans' ability to even take this bridge anymore, because they didn't have any more black flags. They had lost their Panzerschreck, or their black flag unit. This guy right here. No, sorry, that's the machine gun. Where did their guy go? Yeah, this right here. Their black flag unit from this machine gun on a hill here. The Allies got lucky, got a hill, got a machine gun on top of it, and kind of had a command of that part of the board within range and taking out stuff. So hills have a very, as you would expect, have a very strategic or tactical importance in this game. A lot of fighting on the bridge towards the end. There was melee. The neat thing about this game, or this scenario playing at this time, was able to use a lot of the different features. Snipers are in this game. They play a little bit different. Vehicles and anti-vehicle weapons play a little bit different. How you use ordnances and how you use penetration. Hill plays a little bit different on line of sight. Melee was able to get a melee in this one, and the rules on that are a little bit different. So really, we're able to really familiarize myself a lot more with the rules and try out a lot of different types of situations, and learn the rules that are and how the cards work with those accordingly. So that was an interesting part. As I said, the Allies really took a command and kind of sat back and were just picking people off the bridge if the Germans were wanting to go towards it. And then the Germans finally took it, and then the Allies the deck was starting, we were in the second turn and more than midway through. And so the Allies decided the U.S. decided to take the bridge. But in doing so, they started losing some units. They lost a tank towards the end as well. And then this is the way it ended up. So not a lot of units left on the board. The Germans were very, very much down to their last squad and leader on the board. So I recommend this scenario to start with, because it does give you some familiarity with the units and with the cards and with the actions. And it's balanced. It's relatively symmetrical. There's a little bit difference in the squads and the equipment, but not in vehicles, but not dramatically different to where you can still make some decisions and win the day. Terrain is a big part of this game because you draw when you move into an area, you don't know what the terrain's going to be. Well, you can do a recon to try to scout that out. That's a really good skill to do because then you hold a terrain card in your hand and then play that terrain card so you can kind of dictate what the terrain's going to be. Otherwise, you draw 2 cards and you got to pick one of them. So you might not get the terrain you want. Like here, this was marsh and -2. This was stream -2. These were the Allies got held up here and the Axis got held up there for quite a bit of time, and those were not favorable terrain. They were kind of like sitting ducks, so to speak, for quite a bit of time. Anyway, so that's how this scenario ended up. I mean, it was almost a draw because if the Germans really were focusing on taking this guy out. When you take out a squad, if they're holding a weapon and they lose the weapon, that's the way I read the rules. So that would have taken them out. Then the Allies couldn't have won either because that was their last black flag, and you have to have a black flag there. So it would have been, I guess, a draw in that. And so it came very, very close to that. I mean, this really came down to the wire, so to speak. So that's the after action report. Let's talk about gameplay. Let's talk about components first. This is a card game, and there's a ton of cards in here. There's a card after card after card after card that you get here. They come in this box here, and they all fit just back into the box. And actually the counters, if you get a large bag, they will lie flat, and you can put those back in the box at the top of the box. So everything does fit back in the box without it bulging. But there is a lot of cards, and the way you sort them, you can organize them however they came, or put them in like between U.S. and Germans, and there are some third-party units in here as well that you can sort into the box. But it's basically a card game. So the cards are everything here. They're your units, they're your leaders, they're your weapons or equipment, they're the terrain, and they're your action cards. And this is the lifeblood of the game, is these action cards. You're going to have a hand of 5 of these each turn, and then you will you play one of your action cards. You can play it for the symbol that's on it and let you do something, or you can discard a card and then activate a unit for whatever its symbols has. Like for this vehicle here, you can discard one of these cards and ignore the symbol and use any one of these icons on here. And so, vehicles can do a lot of different things. So they're a little bit more versatile. So you're never out of options on a turn. There's also a die on here. You don't roll dice in this game. I mean, you do roll dice for the solo game, and dice come with it, but you use the dice to determine stuff. This is your combat rolls, or if you pull two cards for dice for the 2 hit rolls and stuff like that. So this is, and for your morale checks and what have you, it's going through the deck, and that's also a built-in feature too of a turn. So you plow through the deck by using these cards, both as actions, but also as the die rolls, and that's going to be a turn. Once you go through the deck one time, that's a turn. If you go through the deck twice, that's 2 turns. This scenario here was a 2-turn scenario, so you went through the deck twice. So that's your built-in time limitation. There's not like a turn track or anything. You're plowing through these cards and using them for multiple purposes, and is going to determine the time length. So that's a strategy too. You might do a lot of rolls, or that a lot of actions that use rolls, even if you don't really have good chances, but you're wanting to get through the deck and get to a position where the turn ends. So that's an aspect of the game as well. So the cards are fine. They're nice. If you want to sleeve them, they really can't put them back in that box. You'd have to pull out that insert or get your own insert or do something different. But the cards are fine. They're not super thick, but they're not thin either, and they're fine. Don't know if I'd want. I mean, this is a card game, so you probably want to sleeve over time and I don't see any issue with people wanting to sleeve that with a card game like this, but again, they probably won't fit back in the box. The graphics are fine, or actually I like the graphics quite a bit. I mean, on the unit cards, they're very evocative and they're very clear, and you get to see the graphics there. And then the iconography, there's quite a bit of iconography, and it's clearly listed on the card. And then there's usually, like, this is morale, this is attack, that's the superscript is range. On a vehicle, there's like a forward gun, a main gun, or main machine gun, and then you have the ordnance, what it does, high explosive or ordnance, and then you have a morale. So there's a lot of different, whether it's a turret, whether it's a track, there's a lot of different iconography on a vehicle. Also has its armor, front and flank, and then it's 2 hit rolls for the ranges. It's like, I think 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6 maybe, I think is what the different ranges are, but then you have a different to hit and a different penetration on that. So looks like there's a lot on the cards, but once you get into it, it's relatively clear and understandable. Terrain is basically, you're going to have its defense value, and then you're going to have whether it's obstructed or partially obstructed or degraded or something like that, but this affects line of sight. And in the game is whether you have a partially opened eye or a closed eye is like a hill completely blocks line of sight. So the components are nice. Counters are fine. You know, good, decent, thick quality counters. They pop out easily. They're relatively, in my opinion, pre-rounded, so you don't really need to do much, if anything. There, as I said, if you put them in a big enough bag, then this only takes like 3 bags, I think, and they fit nicely back in the top of the box, on top of the rules, and so you can get everything back in the box, so to speak, there. So components are fine in that regard. There's a lot of player aids. As I said, these all over here are all the solo aids. There's 4 charts that are just dedicated to solo, and all the different postures and stuff that can happen there. And then the rest of the charts, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're all double-sided, that deal with gameplay. And you will refer to these from time to time. And this chart right here is the phases of the game, lays it out relatively well, and easy to, refer to this. You'll refer to this quite a bit on your first game, and then once you get into maybe your second game, maybe not so much. Then you have the terrain summary, an objective summary, that like there's different objectives, like this bridge is an objective and the rest is terrain, and you'll have to set up your terrain card at the terrain deck at the beginning, and there's rules for that. And different scenarios might add or subtract to the terrain deck, and of course they'll change out objectives, so you got to follow that. And then a lot of these are kind of combat aids that you need to refer to from time to time. The game is really not that complex. The 2 things I would say about the game that you need to spend a little time with is the iconography, understanding what the different moves are or different actions are based on the action iconography, but also it's also on the units themselves, because you can always discard to use that. So you got to familiarize yourself with that. The action cards themselves don't have text on it, so it's all going to be the iconography there. The same is true with the units as well. Sometimes there might be some text on the terrain, but that usually means that, like, you can't refuse it. I mean, you have to play. If you draw that, you got to play that. You can't pick between the other ones and stuff like that. But there's not. Usually there's not a lot of text on this stuff, so you've got to refer to this chart and get familiar with this. Again, after you've played, actually partway through your first game, you're probably going to be like, okay, I know what those mean. I know what I'm doing here. And you might just be looking up a new symbol or something that you want to do something different. But for the most part, this is going to become second nature over time. It is a card game, and there is iconography, so there's a learning curve there. The other learning curve is really the line of sight. Normally in combat, it's the combat procedure is usually a little bit more complicated. This combat procedure is based a lot on the lock and load tactical, which is a relatively easy system to understand. You're just rolling a couple of dice and you're adding modifiers after you do some differences, and you're trying to get morale down. So, I mean, I'm not going to explain the whole combat system, but it's it's not that complex. However, this line of sight is a little bit more complex. I mean, it's not super complex, but I mean, if you look at a lot of line of sight systems in a lot of games, especially tactical games, they can get pretty in depth and they can get pretty confusing. But this one is somewhat confusing by nature because you're abstracting. You're not playing with a normal board. And again, you don't have to play with this board that comes with it or this mat. I have this under Plexi. You can play with markers and mark the rows and columns, be A through E and 1 through whatever, and you can play with it without using this underlay at all. I like the underlay because it allows you someplace to put the cards, and you can put more than one thing in an area and kind of keep it sorted mentally, because this is an abstraction. It's a card game. The terrains are cards, the units are cards, your actions are cards. So it's somewhat abstracted, and so the line of sight is kind of abstracted as well, or is trying to overlay line of sight onto an abstract surface. So, but it's really not that complicated after you've gone through a turn or two, or actually after you've been through maybe half a dozen combat situations. You're going to start recognizing what are the different situations and how you handle it. A lot of it is measuring line of sight from the target, from the attacker to the center, and from the target to the center, and then seeing what the intervening line of sights are. If you got 2 of these, that equals out to a block. If you got 1 of the blocks, that equals out to a block, and so you got blocked line of sight. So there's like 5, I think, general situations, depending on you're in the same row across, or you're on a different columns across, and stuff like that. But this takes a little bit of getting to. As I said, you probably won't have this mastered after your first game, but well into your second game, you're going to be like, okay, I know what I'm doing with line of sight. And the same is true with the icons. But those are the 2, just out of the box, so to speak. You're going to spend a little bit of time on these 2 charts, or at least in the rules on these 2, trying to understand, am I doing that right? The combat, once you get the combat a few times, you're going to pick it up. And if you played Lock and Load Tactical, then it's going to be kind of very familiar to you, so it shouldn't be that hard to jump right into that. Let's talk about the rule book for a little bit. The rule book, I haven't played it enough to have sharp criticism on the rule book. This rule book is laid out a lot like some of the other rules, like Lock and Load Tactical and World at War. It's kind of laid out in what the game concepts are, and then they go into the individual actions are laid out in a little bit more detailed in those actions. However, I did find that I think a more comprehensive glossary or index might have been fine. There's a table of contents, so you can look up stuff here, but I think if they had like an index of like some key words, like of course I draw a blank when I think like bogging or something, where you can look in the back and say where's the bogging rules at, and then that might have been a little bit helpful to have a reference that I can point right to the rules, because some of the rules are in multiple places. Like you might have to look here for the rule, but then it's explained in more detail later on, and so you're like, okay, well, I found it here, but that's not the whole rule. That's just mainly kind of introducing the concept, but then later on is the whole rule, but I got to read that whole section to figure it out. So as I said, I'm not bagging the rules because I think I don't know of a better way. I mean, I'm one of those people that if I don't necessarily have a way to improve it, then what's my criticism mean? But so I don't really have a way necessarily. I haven't thought long enough of it how they might be able to improve it. So it's fine the way it is. But I did hunt and peck a lot. I did kind of search around here and had to go back on where's that at? Okay. And as I said, I think if they just had they have a glossary here, but they don't have like an index glossary, right? Where you can like look and say, all right, that bogging, where's that at? Morale check or leader unit, where's that at? Some of the key concepts that you keep going to quite a bit, or even some of the rare stuff like sniper, because sniper has a whole different rule. just knowing right where that's at, instead of having, because through the index it wasn't as clear where stuff's at, so I had to hunt around a little bit. So again, not panning the game on that. I'm just saying the rules are what they are, but they did take a little bit for me to get through and to use during the game. The more you play, though, the more it becomes second nature. Like with most games, right? The more you play, the less you're going to have to refer to this, and the more you're going to be living on the cards. And then at some point, you're not even living on these player aid cards as much either. You kind of get it second nature. These two, though, will probably be on your table for some time, just because of the nature of them. And then there's also this one here, which is the combat one, is probably the third one I refer to, the third most, because it just has the combat chart and what, whether it's a good order unit or shaken or half squad, and what happens based on the morale, or 2 times the morale, or whatever your final result is. So, and the modifiers on here. So this one's a nice one to hold out to, because it's combat. So this is a combat game. So if you're going to have combat, this chart's going to be used a lot. Again, not complicated, but just a good reference because of the modifiers and what have you. And there's your bog summary right there. But there you have it. That is my initial thoughts. As I said, I like it. I would recommend it. If you're an upfront fan, this is long awaited, because this is a card game that gives you some of the feel of an era gone by, right? Of a small unit tactical squad level game, where it has vehicles as well, and you're maneuvering around and trying to obtain objectives, and interacting with terrain, interacting with different types of armaments and units. There's a command element to some respect, with which is basically portrayed through these action cards. But you also have leaders that do certain things, especially rallying and trying to recover fatigue. Fatigue is an interesting concept here, and I like how they do fatigue. I mean, when an infantry unit like moves or fires, it's going to get a fatigue. And if 1 doesn't mean anything, 2, it starts getting a penalty, and if it gets 3, then it gets spent. So it gets turned on its side. And then you need to have a leader or one of these rally actions to get that back from that point. So you overuse a unit, you're going to wear them out, and they're not going to be useful until you do something to get them back. Vehicles, don't fatigue when they move, but they do fatigue like when they do other things. So there's an issue there as well. So I recommend. I like this space, and as I said, playing it 2-player, I think it really shines, because you each have your own deck of action cards, and you're making decisions based on that, and you're dealing with the same battle space, so you're trying to figure out how to maneuver stuff. I mean, it becomes a little chess-like, right? Although this isn't as abstract as chess, because you actually have units performing differently and having different capabilities. That's a lot of flavor to it, but this whole decision space and using the action cards, you're pitting your wits against someone else, and you're trying to mitigate your luck of what you drew. But again, you're always never completely out of luck, because you can do something on a turn. It might not be optimal, but you can do something on a turn. So overall, like the components. Excited to see where this goes. This has a lot of play in it, yet I've not even scratched the surface. I haven't even opened up the box, basically, if you want to use that analogy. There's a lot of play here, but I can see this easily going to, this is West Front, I can see easily going to East Front or Africa, or heaven forbid, Pacific Theater, because it would have different terrain, and you might have whole different actions that might come into play. With some of the different tactics that were used over there, that was in response to some of the terrain, but also in response to some of the culture. So, beach landings and what have you. So, they can do a lot with this. So this is coming out. If you've ordered it, you should be getting it soon. Check it out. This episode's not meant to be an explanation of the rules. Don't rely on me for the rules. But I want to give you a feel for what my initial thoughts are of the game itself, the gameplay, talk about a scenario at least, so you can see how they play out. And just again, my initial thoughts. It's going to change over time, but I'm liking it, and I think it's only going to get better the more I play it. So anyway, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for taking time out on this. I probably went on too long, but I am excited about this, and I know that should be hitting your doorsteps shortly. So I wanted to get this out so you can kind of see what some of my initial thoughts are. Love to know what your thoughts are. Once you get this, well, if you haven't got it yet, what do you think? Are you excited? Are you not? Are you going to get it? Once you get it, put your comments in there and tell me I'm full of it, or tell me, hey, that makes sense, or have you thought about this? Because I probably haven't, and you're smarter than I am. So anyway, thank you for stopping by. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching.